So how did you become what you are?
I was very fortunate in having parents like mine. My father was, this was almost before I knew him. By the time I really knew him, he had worked so hard and struggled so much that he was a different man. In his youth, he was also, something of a political person, very much interested in education. My mother was just a goddess, actually. She just was like an earth spirit. My mother could make anything grow. My mother could, feed us, clothe us, shelter us, just like this just incredible being. I mean, I have never known anyone who impressed me as much as my mother did, and just in a very natural way. So my foundation in the home was very good, because I could see that even though my father was declining in many ways, there were still glimmers of the person he had been. And my mother continued to be magnificent, until she had a huge stroke about 15 years ago. And so, I went to school. I did very well in school. I started when I was 4. And I started when I was 4 because my mother had to work. She had about 5 jobs all the time. She was a dairy person. She was a farmer. She took care of all of us. She cooked. I mean, she just did all of these things. And she always managed to have magnificent gardens. So my sense of beauty was always encouraged just by her example. So I went to school at 4 because she had to work all the time. And so she asked the first grade teacher in the little school if I could come, even though I was so young. And this teacher, who's alive today and who's a wonderful woman, said, of course, send baby Alice. And I went, and I loved it. And she was really good to me, and she knew my family, from even before I was born. So my association with learning was very positive. I remember when I was 4 or 5, mostly what I did was make ducks out of bars of ivory soap, and I made coloring. I did coloring and coloring books. And then people would always give me books because they understood that I loved to read, and they were always amazed that I read so early. And so I was really, in a sense, pampered by the community in a very gentle and sweet way. And I just continued. I went off to college, and I joined the movement while I was in college at Spelman in Atlanta. And then because Spelman was so traditional and restrictive, I went on to Sarah Lawrence, where I could have more freedom. And throughout, I was as active as I could be, since I was pretty much a penniless student. But I was as active as I could be in the movement. And then when I graduated from Sarah Lawrence, I worked in the welfare department. Hated it. I was writing stories and articles at night. It was very tiring. And then a friend who had offered me a scholarship years before, which I had turned down because it had strings attached, reappeared, and was shocked that I was living in a building that didn't have a front door, and gave me the money, the scholarship, and I went to Mississippi, and I worked in movement there. I lived there for about 7 years. And I got married, and I had my daughter.
How old is your daughter?
26.
Oh. Mm-hmm. What's she like?
Estella, you ask me about these people, and I keep thinking you'd have to see them, And she likes Cuba. I sent her there. She is very outspoken, very courageous in her way. Lovely.
Why did you send her there?
Well, I wanted her to see that there is a different way, that there really is a different way. I mean, it is so painful to realize that our children, by and large, live in this culture thinking that this is the cream of the crop in terms of how you live. And basically, this society is a society that worships money, period. And what you can buy with it is a very consumer-oriented place, where, necklaces and blue jeans and all of those things are more important than thought, not to mention feeling. and not to mention community, you know. And I kept thinking, I cannot allow this. I cannot allow my daughter to grow up thinking that this is really all you can get, I mean, out of life, that this is it. And so I sent her, and I've sent several people. I send young people, I send my relatives. You know, I tried to send my brother before he died because he was completely brainwashed about Cuba. He really thought each time I went that I wouldn't return because the Cubans would have locked me in a dungeon and tortured me. And he would never, you know, I could never convince him otherwise. And he was, you know, a wonderful man, but just completely brainwashed.
But he never went.
He never went. His son went. His son, his daughter-in-law, I sent them. Came back, you know, Dad, this is what happened. Here are the photographs. You know, look, we're here. They didn't, you know. He never, ever could be changed. And then, but, you know what changed him? I remember. He had leukemia. And the whole last year of his life, he was struggling with this horrible disease. But you know, the other side of him was that he was just wonderful. I mean, he was a Buddha. You know, the other side was the Buddha nature. So I would go to see him, and we would sit and talk about different things. And the only time I think it really got to him what the embargo meant to the Cubans was that I patiently explained to him that the medication that he was receiving to arrest, you know, his leukemia could not be had in Cuba, and that the people with leukemia were suffering because they couldn't get the treatment that he was getting. And he just couldn't believe it. And I think that was just before he died, he finally got it, that you cannot keep medicine or food or any kind of assistance that people need from them, that this is absolutely immoral, wrong, and that there's just no question about it.
Do you remember the first time you ever heard about Fidel Castro?
Yes, in the newspaper and on television. We were very late getting a TV. But I think in around 1961, in the newspaper in 59, of course, but then later. But I wasn't immediately, I mean, there was something really wonderful about the way they all looked, of course, you know, very, the beards and, you know, just the passionate mannerisms and, you know, the stature. But because I was coming out of a place where white people were totally oppressive, I couldn't really feel them because they were white. I felt that these are white people, and when they get in power, they'll be just like all the other white people who've ever gotten into power. And so I didn't really, you know, but then I started as a student, of course, to read everything that came out of the struggle, and they just made so much sense.
This man is special.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was an Israeli who refused to go into the army. He was put in prison 3 times. He was a filmmaker, and then he had a film. He met Annie Lennox then. They have 2 children now and everything. But so he was very the figure of Fidel Castro. So I said, okay. Well, and so we started a little bit, and he bought us a fax machine and all those things. You think, Alice, just one thing, my sound is coming in from this, right? My questions?
No.
But it's also akin to a child's mind. And that's
Fidel's what?
Fidel's mind. He maintains his child's mind. And that is very wonderful. Not many people can hang on to the child's curiosity. And he does. And I've seen it. I mean, when he reunited with Angela, when we all went to see him, and they were embracing, and he thought nobody was looking, he was examining her dreadlocks. And I thought, yeah, you know, that's really what a child would do. But by the time you're a grown-up, you know, you're not supposed to, you know, but of course you should. You should touch the world. You should continue to examine it. You should look at it. You should smell it. You should know what it's made of. You know, it's all wonderful.
But he didn't say anything, did he?
No,
but you notice.
Of course. Writers always notice.
Right. But you were saying that your second visit to Cuba
yes.
was different?
Well, I was very disturbed about this thing about, gays and what was happening. And I thought, oh, Lord, the machismo is going to kill off, this wonderful forward momentum that they have, just seemingly across the board because, everything seemed to be from the heart. I mean, it didn't seem, like in Russia, things that seemed kind of, dry and gray and drab and everything. But anyway, I went back and I asked to be taken to a sanitarium. And I was, able to talk to some of the people who were there. I mean, gay people with AIDS. I mean, this is not to say that everybody had AIDS, but I wanted to know how the sick people were treated because I knew that would tell me a lot about how everybody is treated.
What year was that?
That was 93, I think. And so, I was able to see that they were well cared for and talk to people who just said basically they were bored. That they were getting good food and good care, but, they were just really bored. And so there was a new policy that would permit people to go out on the weekends to spend with their families. And, I felt much better because before I had left, people were saying that, gay people with AIDS were in sort of a gulag situation. And, of course, that would have just been intolerable. And then I've seen now a film, not Strawberry and Chocolate, which I didn't particularly like, actually, but another film about gay people in Cuba. And there seems to be such an improvement. I mean, just so much more freedom and so much more understanding, and also a real countrywide effort to understand this new, very old way of life. And, I feel that there is much more respect, for gay people. And that gay people themselves are just beginning to be able to blossom and to really, give all that they have to give to their country without feeling like there's a part of them that they have to shut up.
In your conversations with Fidel, did the subject of gay people ever come up?
No.
Why do you think, Alice, that Fidel Castro, the figure of Fidel Castro, evokes so many emotions? Strong emotions, people in favor and people against?
I think it's his character. I think that he himself is so incredibly, toweringly passionate. That he himself is just, very volatile in his sort of natural way, of speaking, of convincing, of cajoling, of, whatever. I mean, he is really very powerful. And I think that is one very basic place where people feel that they have to meet that passion somehow. And since there are not very many people in the world who can meet that passion with the same kind of good-heartedness that I think he has, they bring what they do have, which is, a sort of passionate disagreement, a passionate dislike, a passionate, whatever. And so someone like me, I mean, where I feel, I mean, I enjoy the passion. I mean, I can, appreciate every change of mood, because it seems to me that is what is wonderful about meeting with people. They're supposed to be different, and they're supposed to have many ways of expressing themselves, and they're supposed to go through changes. But if you're not used to that, and if you're in a culture like this one where people just do everything they can to be, talking heads, they think that to be a talking head is the highest mark of civilization. You're just supposed to be there with nothing else moving but, kind of here, no light in your eyes, your heart totally, just chilled out. So I think that's part of it. And then, of course, there's what he's saying. And there's what he's doing. And there's the fact that they haven't been able to kill him. I mean, that must really be upsetting, that they have not been able to kill this man who has persisted in being exactly who he is for all of these years against the mightiest power on the earth. It's quite phenomenal. It's wonderful. I mean, it's something that it seems to me that people should appreciate, just as a phenomenon, I mean, he's his own kind of redwood. When I think of Fidel, I often think of him as a redwood tree, in California. We're down to really fighting for the very last of the old ones, these precious old trees. And the lumber companies, in which Clinton has just given freedom to start cutting them again. But we fight for these old trees. I mean, they are magnificent. And they do the heart good. I mean, you may not like redwood. You may prefer oak, or pine. But actually, they are magnificent. And I think that just to have them just around encourages the spirit. And Fidel is like that, whether you like him or not. He is incredible.
And he's 70 years old.
He's old. He's 70 years old, yes. Well, I think it'd be great for him to be 100, and more, just so we could see it. We need to see old revolutionaries. I mean, think of all of our revolutionaries. They mostly die young. Well, that's glorious too, but how wonderful to have a really old revolutionary. I mean, he could be 85 and he could have a beard down to his waist, and hair out to here, or none, and how good for us to see this, that it's possible to be a revolutionary and to grow old.
And some people say that he's been in power too long, the 37 years is too long.
Well, they do, and maybe it is. I don't feel like I can say what's too long for the people of Cuba or what's too long for Fidel. Having been there, I think that if the people felt like it was too long, they would give him his gold watch.
And some people said, well, he's in power so long thanks to his adversaries.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think he's in power so long partly because people really like him. Now, and actually love him, really. And I sometimes think that he's too much of a father. I mean, I think it's about father now. And I think that's why people feel such loyalty and such devotion. I mean, he is just like the island's, the country's father. And there might be a real problem with that, but I don't know. And I figure, if there is a real problem with it, the people can take care of it. They are well educated. They really think for themselves. They can really talk you under the table, and they're armed. So, if they are sick of father, I think father will not be there forever.
He's outlived 9 U.S. presidents.
Exactly.
And some presidents have said terrible things about him.
Yes, well, they would.
Johnson said he would like to take that Castro fellow, wash him, shave him, and spank him.
Sounds like a sexual thing to me. That really tells us a lot about Johnson. He doesn't say that about Lady Bird.
And speaking about people who love him and people who don't, the people in Africa have a special feeling to Castro.
Well, the people in Africa should, because especially in South Africa, because I think without the Cubans' help, they would not have been able to overthrow apartheid. I mean, Cubans not only sent word and, support and, but they actually died there fighting against the South African armies. So, and I think Fidel at some point mentioned that, he felt himself to be a part of Africa. I mean, he has never, it seems to me that he has never really traded on being white. And it's because he doesn't, have that white trip that we often in the third world tend to forget it. I mean, I don't wake up thinking about Fidel as a white person, ever, except when I was very young and I thought he was just like all the rest. But I think when I realized that he was interested in teaching people to read and write, and he wanted, free health care and education and cheap food for everyone, he didn't resemble the oppressors anymore. So that was very good.
Right. Many important personalities in the United States have tried to meet Fidel Castro, people who have different ideologies. You see the Rockefellers going to Cuba, Ted Turner going to Cuba, Hank Aaron going to Cuba, Muhammad Ali.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think it is so?
I think that, many people have a great deal of affection for Fidel. And I think love is the most mysterious thing anyhow. You never know really why you love people. You just do. You just do. And for some people, it could be that he strikes in them a memory of, the kind of world they wish they could have had when they were children. I mean, that's how I often feel, What would it have been like, cut that, but what would it have been like growing up to not have to worry about health care, for me and my family, when everybody was often sick, or free education. So I don't know about why everybody else, wants to affirm Fidel. But for me, it's because he reminds me of what could have been in my own life.
And why do you think there is so much hostility to Fidel Castro here?
Well, because of all those Cubans that came to Miami. I think if they weren't here in Miami, constantly bending the ear of the White House, many people wouldn't think about Cuba. The other thing is, of course, is that this is a capitalist country, and Cuba is a socialist one, and it's very near. And if people could just see it, see what the Cubans are doing as socialists, I think the critique of capitalism here would be much stronger and much clearer.
Have you been criticized because of your attitude or your activities in relation to Cuba?
Yes. My favorite criticism was from an Australian news person. He was interviewing me. I thought he wanted to talk about my books. But instead, he just started, raving about why are you supporting this dictator, and don't you know that this man is blah, blah, blah. He had a whole list of things. But I was struck by his choice of the word dictator because I couldn't believe he thought he lived in anything other than a dictatorship, because it is so ridiculous, I think, to think that there are democracies that we live in, I mean, what we have is a corporate white male dictatorship. And they very cleverly change whatever white man is at the head every 4 or 8 years. But they're all pretty much the same. I mean, even the ones who, are really good, quote, do good things, they're usually forced to do good things. If they pass a bill that helps poor people, it's usually because they can't do anything else, and rich people are getting upset, because the poor people, they have to drive over them, they're sleeping in the street, or they, stumble against them and they don't smell good. I mean, it's so. So I always think that the Cubans, even if Fidel is a dictator, have come out much better than we have because, they've had only one dictator in 35 years and we've had 9. So I have been criticized so much in my life that this is just one more, and I can't really care.
But you feel connected to, you're a well-known writer, but you continue doing the things that you think are right.
Always. Absolutely. That is where the joy is, as I'm sure you know.
Did you, I don't know what frame you're in now, but I'm going to start asking, interesting, going in a little. You also said that Fidel would be considered a traitor if he would retire in the middle of all this hostility with Cuba.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's true.
So those are the ideas a little bit. And then just an ending that I have.
Well, and not only that, I mean, I don't see how he could have just stepped away now. It wouldn't make sense. Oh, God, I lost that thought. Well, anyway, let's go on. Maybe it'll come back.
Okay. In order to save justice, right, sometimes you have to sacrifice freedom. In a more open society, if the U.S. was not so hostile, and that he would be considered a traitor, right, if he retired in the middle of this situation.
Mm-hmm. I know what it was. Well, in this country, they think, by now people have been programmed to think that you actually have to have elections, every however, and this is the democratic way. But in fact, can you imagine Cuba trying to afford an election like the kind we have? These things cost so much money. Where is that going to come from? I mean, there has to be, if there's going to be an election in a poor country like Cuba, like Haiti, like, Ghana, there has to be some other way of doing it. I mean, maybe they can come up with a way. And I don't know about the elections that they had. I think there was an election.
The Cubans have their elections. There's a different kind of election.
I would think.
And they have this one party, but there are different sectors in that one party. They said they can't fragment. They can't, for the unity's sake.
Right.
They have to keep together.
Mm-hmm. Well, in any case, it's their choice. I mean, I don't understand this one here, except that I now know it is completely controlled by corporations, who have even called themselves trustees of it. So in our country, it is very corrupt, the system. Of elections, right. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody. I mean, there's no point in wishing that on anyone.
It's been said that people, not individuals, make history. Do you think this applies to Cuba and Fidel Castro?
People, not individuals? What does that mean?
The history is made by the people and not by individuals. But
in
the case of
Cuba,
do you think that Castro's role shaped history?
Oh, I do. I think so.
Say the whole sentence.
Well, I think that Castro's role in shaping Cuba is major. It really is. There's no getting around it, I don't think. But I would say that the Cuban people, and I get so annoyed that they are overlooked. I mean, people insist, it seems to me, on sticking Fidel's head on top of every Cuban body that you ever try to see, So you never see the people. I mean, but I think that's partly the way the image is managed, especially here in this country. So that, when I think of Cuba, I don't automatically think of Fidel. I mean, I do think of him because he is so large. But I also think of the people there, the ones who are teachers and, doctors and, just regular people.
Do you think?
And they've made it. I mean, you do sometimes have to have leadership, people who have a vision and who benefited from an education, which he definitely did. But, you also are important in carrying forward what is, considered by consensus the best, for your society.
Some people have said that Fidel Castro was a lonely man. Did you get a sense of that?
I did. Now, but I also am modest enough to understand that I know nothing about him, his life, his private life. So, who am I to even presume that he may be lonely? But I must say I felt that he was. It's just a feeling.
He keeps his private life very private. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's so?
Well, I've had many thoughts about that over the years. I thought, well, if you're constantly being worried that somebody's going to assassinate you, you would hide your children. You would hide your young, like any creature in the forest, And that has always made the most sense to me. I mean, for someone so large, so visible, so hated, that, you wouldn't want anybody standing next to you, really.
Do you think there's ever any possibility of Clinton and Fidel coming together and talking?
As an optimist, I am. I do. I think that that is possible, but I don't feel that it will necessarily mean very much, because I think Clinton is so easily persuaded, against his better judgment. I think that if they did talk, he would be, and I think he may be fearful of this, he would be in some ways captivated, because Fidel's personality is just so, it's interesting. I mean, he is an interesting person. And Clinton, I think, could benefit from, his knowledge, his experience. It could be a really good thing if they talked and if they developed some kind of relationship. I mean, even if they were not heads of their countries, it seems to me that, especially in these times, we really need all the mentoring we can get. And I think Fidel would be a very good mentor for Bill.
How do you think history, 50 years from now, will remember Fidel?
Positively. When I was in Russia, when I was a student, I was 18, I took the train from the Finland station all the way down through, the Soviet Union and through Kiev, and I was reading History Will Absolve Me the whole time. And I was so moved because, at last, here was someone actually writing about the condition of my own people. And I think that is prophetic, the title of his book, History Will Absolve Me. Because look at the world. Where is it going? It is going in the direction of rich people being excessively greedy and rude and mean and killing off the earth, people, everything. And all of this is so clear. It's not as if, is it all hazy. It's very clear. And poor people, on the other hand, are more and more destitute. They're being treated much more badly, than anyone 30 years ago would have expected. I didn't expect it. Our communities are being drugged into oblivion, by people who then take the money and, just buy up whatever's left. So in the context of this kind of world, students, people of color, poor people, women, will absolutely begin, if they haven't already, to understand what he intended, even if they never understand what Cuba has accomplished.
What do you think will happen after Fidel?
Well, that worries me a little bit, because I don't know who is there to carry on and what kind of power they have. And I can illustrate the kind of thing I fear by telling you that I'm very close to the Native American community in this country, many Native American communities. And I was very good friends with one leader named Bill Wapapa. And he was like Fidel, but not, volatile, and, he was very powerful in a very sort of soft-spoken way, very, almost Buddhist in his manner. But he could connect everyone. I mean, there was just something about him. He was also a focal point for people, and especially for the Native American community locally. But he died. And a younger Native American man took his place. And he just didn't have that. He wasn't able to bring us together. We just, So, that I am concerned. I mean, I don't know if there's someone, they don't have to be, a carbon copy by any stretch, but they do have to have a certain ability to keep people together. I mean, to keep them feeling that they are a country, and not an island.
Could you just tell me in one sentence, what is Fidel Castro?
A revolutionary. And I would say now he may be upset to be called old, and I hope he won't be. But I would just say he's a beautiful old revolutionary.
Good. Okay, did you anything? I don't know.
What would you say?
Oh, you know what? Well, everybody says something different. It was very good. Nobody said it the way you did. And then you kept it on her a long time, so that was good. Madame Mitterrand said, she spoke about the French resistance and how she heard about him the first time and whatever. And then when I asked her that, she says, well, it's like the French resistance. He's the man who's resisted or was opposed or something like that. In French, she said it all. The dictatorship of the money.
Yeah, right.
Interesting way of putting things.
Right.
She was very Pierre Cardin.
So he should dress him.
Pierre Cardin was like this. And, oh, he's a beautiful man. He's big like de Gaulle. big like de Gaulle. But he's a dictator.
Oh.
He said it, but then he started saying how much he cared for him. I mean, he wants to open up Maxim's, his restaurant.
In Cuba, right?
Yeah.
In Havana.
And it's like these people have but they're so...
But see, that's what they mean, though. You know, what they mean by dictatorship is basically, that poor people. Let me do this. Yeah, because I really want to speak to this, though.
Yeah.
I can't get it. I'm too tired. But it's like what they want is a dictatorship of the rich, not a dictatorship of the poor. You know what I mean? But when you have a workers' party that is in power, that's what you have. I mean, you have I wouldn't want to call them a dictatorship, but if the people rule, instead of the rich people, then, they rule. And they're the majority. And Pierre Cardin, is not going to have his restaurant right in the middle of Havana. No.
And, we interviewed Edward Heath, the ex-prime minister of England. And we were looking for, critical. He wouldn't. He goes down to Cuba all the time, and he's very fascinated by the figure of Fidel Castro and visits and defends.
Yeah, I just,
And did you not write a letter to Clinton? Somebody told me that.
I did.
Because he spoke to us about that. He said we were there in London at the time of the downing of the planes.
Oh, yeah.
So he was furious at the United States for the
Right.
Helms-Burton and all of that.
No, I did. I wrote to him.
What'd you say?
Well, I was just trying to make him understand that you cannot starve people, you can't starve children, and you can't, stand shoulder to shoulder with Jesse Helms, who was one of the segregationists who tormented my grandparents, my parents, and me. That I had to give years of my life, and many people had to die because of laws against black people that man put into effect. So Clinton, by signing the Helms-Burton bill shoulder to shoulder with this man, was to me just the gravest insult possible to all people of color. So anyhow, he wrote back.
Clinton.
And actually, what had happened was he had invited me to the White House, to meet, and I don't know, and I didn't go, and I wrote this letter instead, and he wrote back in the first line, a little formal stuff, and then he just launches into all this Cold War ideology, about how Cuba would be like Chile and Haiti and, I mean, it was just really uninformed. And again, I would say that, he would have to see for himself. And he has to stop listening to the Cubans in Miami, who are not going to vote for him no matter what he does. And also, they were trying to elect Hillary's brother, to some... I mean, it's all just unbelievably inhumane, that you'd sell out a whole country to elect somebody's brother, or to get votes for yourself. I mean, it's unreal. How can you sleep at night?
Do you think after the election things might change?
Well, Stella, we're such pitiful people, really. I mean, we hang on every hope. I mean, why should we think that things will change just because he's reelected? I mean, is it because he will, he can only be there for 8 years? And then we think that in these 4, he's going to just come back and be really great? I don't know if greatness is there. And I certainly, don't think Cuba should, after all these years, put much hope in it. I think that their best bet is what they're doing, just trying to be as independent as they can be, given what they're under.
You think the revolution will survive?
Not in the form that they would really ideally want it to, no. Yeah, I mean, that's totally an impossible dream, I think. Tourism, which I really despise, is the kiss of death, I think, to anything that is really authentic. I left San Francisco because it was like living on a postcard.
They have no other choice.
Oh, I know that. And that's what's sad, And I just hope that somehow, because of, 37 years of trying to be new people, they will maintain some of that.
They are a different people, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they are. But it's a tragedy to lose that. They are themselves a different kind of, redwood tree, And every other country has been clear-cut.
And you'd call Fidel a redwood?
He is a redwood tree. He's an old-growth redwood tree. And all around him has been clear-cut, and he's still standing. And they're lusting to go in and make that final cut. And then we will have nobody, really. We'll have, not like that. We'll have many other wonderful people, and we ourselves will be, whoever and whatever we are. But he is an inspiration.
You're glad that you met him. He's 70 years old, so...
I never expected to. I always wished I could, But yeah, I'm really happy to have met him. I think he's really, really a special person. And also, I never feel I have to agree to every single thing that anybody does, really. I mean, I feel quite free to just appreciate what is wonderful and affirm that,
Nice pictures you have. I love those pictures. Yeah.
Well, it was a good meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I think, too, you cannot meet Fidel without also in spirit feeling that you're meeting Che and, Camilo and Cecilia. Celia. And Abel. Abel. And Maria. So all of that was in the moment of meeting, and I brought with me Malcolm, and I brought with me Martin, and I brought with me Fannie Lou, and I brought with me Rosa Parks, So that is what makes, a moment really rich and real, when you know that you are embracing, all the dead and what they hoped for. And I will never forget Che lying dead with his hands cut off. And I think, one of the places where you meet Fidel is knowing that in his loneliness, whatever it is, he has to think about that too. These are hands that he knew.
Well, we're interviewing Che's daughter. We traveled with her.
Uh-huh.
And she just was coming from Europe with us at the same time. She was going there to say all these stories. They're trying to start all these stories that Fidel and Che didn't get along, and he sent him to his death and whatever.
I know that. I've heard that.
So she's been traveling, talking about that.
Well, they said everything they could possibly say. But my feeling about that is that if you had sent someone deliberately to his death, you wouldn't have his face stuck up all over the place. You couldn't bear it as a human being. I mean, you would have to be so devious, so twisted, So no, I never really believed that.
And the grandchildren, Che's grandchildren call him Grandpa.
Mm-hmm, they should, I think.
It's nice that he's reading your book. I love that.
Well, when I saw him the next time, and he said, yes, very interesting. And I was thinking, you don't remember a word of it.
Right. And he's quite happy of this picture embracing you.
Well, that was, the embrace that says, I come from a world where they've killed everybody that, spoke up. And you come from a world where they killed everybody but you. And he looks like the redwood tree there,
So big.
See?
You felt
And dressed in green.
and happy.
Mm-hmm. Happy.
Happy redwood.
That's the wonderful thing, about struggle, though. People think it's really just all, and it's true. A lot of it is that. But there is so much happiness, just to survive another day, to do something more in the world that expresses your vision of how things should be, and to make people happier. I mean, he's made so many people happy.
And he loves challenges, and he always has to win.
Yeah, well, I know. Well, he's got his... I think he's arrogant. He has his arrogance. But I think he's actually needed it in fighting this country. It would not do to have a leader in Cuba, I think, who was more conciliatory.
And they're furious at him here.
Yeah.
It's like a fixation.
Well, but, compared to him, they look wimpy. And I think that's very hard because they try to be, macho, and they do horrible things in the world. But personally, they just don't have his power. He has personal power. They have political power, he has that too, but he also has personal power. And our leaders rarely have, actually Johnson did have personal power, Kennedy had style and charisma and youth and, a sense of humor and some good things, but basically not strong enough, and from a class that was too rich. Is that it?
Nixon in his memoirs said that they made a mistake with Cuba.
Oh, yeah?
Ernesto was insisting that we interviewed Mandela, and Mandela spoke about...
But wait a minute, what was the mistake with Cuba? I'm curious. Nixon
in his
speaks...
memoirs, he wrote that that U.S. should have had diplomatic relations with Cuba, that it was a mistake.
Right, it was a mistake.
He wrote that in his
Now
memoirs.
he tells us.
Yeah.
We were telling him that all the while.
Yeah.
Nixon is the kind of man that you just want to say, jerk, stay dead.
And Mandela said, if it wasn't for Cuba, he wouldn't have gotten out of prison when he did in South Africa.
I believe that.
So You know, there were 18,000 African students in Cuba studying.
Yeah, I didn't know the number, but I knew they were, of course.
Each school was another
No,
country.
I know that. I mean, the thing is that Cuba has been extremely generous. And this is a spirit of heart, that is cultivated and promoted and cherished. It is not an accident that people want to go and teach somewhere in the backwoods of, some swampy land, This is definitely something that has been fostered as a revolutionary spirit. And I think, Fidel has had everything to do with that.
We were in Namibia. I was in Namibia the day it became a free country.
Mm-hmm. Really sad. Because it's true, he was saying how at the UN they all got up there. And I mean, I watch television. I give myself 2 hours a week of it. And I often don't use them, so I don't know a lot of things. But he was saying how, they got up in the UN, they were all talking about how glad they are that apartheid is dead. And, they all act like, it's so wonderful now that the bad races are not in power and blah, blah, blah. And that nobody said a word about Cuba's role, about Cubans who died doing, fighting the apartheid government. And that is so inexcusable.
Could you repeat that again, what you just said? Because there's
Oh.
a little bit of, yeah.
John, if you wouldn't mind staying there. Okay.
Yeah, okay. Because you know what, I want to tell you something that's very important, because I was in Namibia the day that, you know what, they thank the United Nations all the time. Paris de Cuellar, the head of the Secretary General, was there, and nobody mentioned Angola, and nobody mentioned Cuba. Even Angola, how many people were killed? Yeah, just that whole idea.
Right. Well, I was just saying that when I listened to Fidel's speech that he gave in Harlem, and he was talking about having been at the UN, he was saying that, one person after another got up and they praised the UN and they praised this one and that one for ending apartheid in South Africa. And no one mentioned the sacrifice that Cuba had made, not just in terms of material aid, but in actual lives to the battle against South Africa, which actually led to the liberation of South Africa. This is not small, And I just felt such pain and such anger, really, that this had been, of course, with great deliberation, ignored. Their contribution had been ignored. But we mustn't forget it, we won't. I mean, I will always be very grateful for what Cuba has done in Africa.